In today's video, I paint a BMW logo, I make a puzzle from instruction manual, I mix a red paint, also try to imitate wooden propeller, in my free time I design a suitcase, and lastly I paint a red curtain. Hello fellow modelers! MiniArt recently released this beautiful transport aircraft in 48 scale. I couldn't resist and immediately ordered one. It contains straightforward manual and 3 markings, but the yellow one is the best. Also there are many parts, including detailed engine and interior. I was primarily curious about surface details, because this plane has a characteristic corrugated skin. But as you can see, the details are simply astonishing. And if you need more details, there are also metal parts for seatbelts or handles. Alright, let's get started on this project. With all the intricate details involved, it's important for me to be meticulous when taking parts out of the sprue. I had the problem with a perfect rib fitting, so I made the plastic slightly thinner. It might be a necessary adjustment, but it's definitely easier than having to make the corrections later on. The kit has many small parts. I use a poster gum, which allows comfortable manipulation. I like that the kit has the metal parts with fine details, only it is necessary to use a super glue. Some parts are smaller than 1 mm, so I try not to lose them. The fuselage parts are thin and do not have a proper connection pins. It could be frustrating to assemble them with ordinary glue for plastic, thus I instead use a strong super glue. I highly recommend 3M Scotch weld. It holds a Guinness record for bonding and I must admit, it is strong. I'm making holes for seatbelts with a 0.3 mm micro drill bit. It is suitable to make holes and glue the seatbelts inside. The shaping of the metal strips is then easier. I found a nice historical photo of the Junkers cockpit. I noticed that some pipes and levers need to be included. I'm making new levers from melted copper wire. You only need old wires and jet lighter. I'm imitating pipes from lead wires because they are soft and easy to shape. The interior was probably in aluminum shade, but it is hard to say. Around 300 planes were made, many modified for private use. So the interior had, for example, alcohol bar, fancy sofas or extra fuel tank. Also the cockpit could have had some modifications, but I made it according to the manual. I'm painting small details of acrylic paints that can be diluted with water, making them pleasant to use. I smooth instrument decals with Decals chemicals. Mr. Color Silver 8 is resilient paint. I can apply dark wash without worries about damaging the paint job. I am highlighting the details with a dark brown oil paint, diluted with a odorless thinner. The last step is to imitate cover glass with a clear varnish. The floor for passengers could be carpet, therefore I am spraying a thick paint which creates a soft orange peel texture. I like fancy red curtains, if you want privacy or you don't want to see freezing pilot. My improvement is plywood board, which I am imitating with oil paints. The next step involves working on seats, being by applying the first layer with an airbrush After that I add shading to deepen the color using highly diluted acrylic paint. It is partially transparent, so it makes a nice inconsistent layer. However, I prefer oil paints for final shading, which have a stronger pigment and you can easily create a soft leather texture. Also, drying time is slow, so you have a lot of time to correct mistakes. Now you can see how easy it is to weather seeds with oil paints. I apply some random black dots and blur them with an enamel thinner. I like easy and fast techniques. I was a little bit skeptical about fitting of this complex interior and fuselage, but all fit without problems. When I saw this aircraft in Munich Deutsches Museum, I was surprised that the cockpit was not covered with the windshield. While passengers enjoyed ample protection, the pilots had far less cover. The prevailing belief was that the pilots need to experience weather conditions freehand in order to fly effectively. I'm making the engine section dirty with oil paints, because every old engine has some oil or fuel leaks. This small BMW motor is included in the kit and has a nice details and tiny parts. The exhaust part has indicated hole, but is too shallow, so I'm making it deeper with a drill bit. It is good to set a low RPM to reduce heat from friction. The next step is to install spark plug wires and link them to the distributor. I don't have a BMW logo decals, so I try to paint them. The sponge is great for imitating a rust texture. I use acrylic paint for this effect because you can make many soft layers. The tailing edge of the flaps is quite thick. It is not much like what you can see on the real aircraft. To achieve a smoother appearance, I use a sharp hobby knife and sandpaper. It is quite messy job, but the end result, while not perfectly realistic, definitely looks much thinner. I am using slow drying superglue to reinforcement the wings, because regular glue for plastic can dissolve the material and lead to the sink marks over the time. However, I use extra thin glue for the edges, since it offers more flexibility at the joint and is less likely to crack. Additionally, it dries quickly, allowing me to avoid damaging the details around the seam lines. The kit gives you a flexibility to either keep the engine cover open or closed, but you can have both options at the same time. So it's time to make some modifications. I need to drill out a hole for exhaust and create openings for the hatch hinges, allowing me to switch between open and closed position. The handles in the kit are made from metal parts, but they are too flat, so replacing them with a copper wire is handy. The only filling that I did was on the wing seam lines, and I used for filling surfacer, which you can comfortably apply with a paintbrush. I must prepare model for spraying, which means cover all the clear parts with a masking tape and already painted sections with a sponge. I cleaned the surface with isopropyl alcohol, which removed grease and dust. Now I am spraying the surface with a highly diluted primer, which reveals imperfections and increases color adhesion. I tried to fit the lines perfectly, but there was still a small seam line, which I removed gently with a sharp hobby blade. Before we start painting the model, let's not overlook a small but important detail: the wooden propeller. It is always a bit of challenge to make it look just right. It's important to gather reference photos of the propeller, since each shape features distinct wood grain patterns. The base layer is light wood, and over is soft layer of a clear varnish. I start with dark wood layers, and I use oil paints. One of the advantages of oil paints is that they dry slowly, gives you plenty of time to adjust the shapes or even wipe them away and start over. Additionally, the pigment is rich, allowing beautifully smooth finish. It's essential to make all blades symmetrical. Hopefully, there are only 2 of them. Now I can simply correct the shape with an enamel thinner and clean brush. If you look from the side, the lines must be parallel. After this process, I let the oil dry properly for 3 days and then fix it with a clear varnish. The second light wood lines are easy. I blend a soft layer of oil paint over the whole propeller. I believe this outcome is acceptable for 48 scale. Now it remains to paint small metal details. aka Real Colors paints are similar to Tamiya acrylics, so I use these shades for spraying. Also, Tamiya yellow shade is not very good because it has a pure coverage properties. I am trying to spray soft layers that preserves decals. Also, I added few drops of a paint retarder into the mix, which prolonged drying time. Otherwise, yellow can make ugly orange peel texture. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. Now I'm spraying highlights with a light yellow on the flat areas, around rivets and top sections or raised details. The decals are only for the white crosses and registration number, so I must mask and paint the rest. It is tricky because the paint job is nicely symmetrical. I measure the plane dimensions and rescale the manual to model scale. This is much better. Now I can easily mask all the shapes correctly. The Rescaled manual is in the video description, so feel free to use it. The Tamiya red paint is again too bright, so adding a few drops of a real color light yellow is suitable. The corrugated surface is almost impossible to mask appropriately, therefore I must spray soft layers. If you spray more paint at once, it can easily flow under the mask. Good trick is to cut out parts from the Rescaled manual to ensure proper shape. And also applying the inner mask according to the outer one is easier. Masking the black drops on the fuselage symmetrically is quite tricky. I adjust the shapes based on rivet counts and lines. Again, try to avoid using pure black for black sections. I use lovely Tamiya rubber black, which has a nice grey-blue tint. It is always easier to make the surface darker than brighter with a shading. Now I'm spraying dark shading on the bottom sections and on the rivet lines. I make them more or less randomly and unevenly. If I spray them everywhere, the surface would be like a chessboard. Unmasking is my favorite part, if everything goes well. Due to complex surface, the paint got slightly under the mask, however it is not a problem. And I expected much more repairs with a brush. I use for repairs acrylic Vallejo paints, and it is essential to mix the correct shade. The decals are large and the surface is complex, therefore applying a soft layer of a clear varnish is handy. I use Decals chemicals to set the decals propeller. The first one is setter, which makes decals slightly softer. I removed the excess water and setter with a paper napkin, and then apply a soft layer of a setter over the decals again. The decals copied the underneath shape slightly, but need to be more fine, so it's time for a stronger decal softener. After drying, the tension made a small cracks. It is not a problem and I can easily cover them with acrylic paint. The most important thing is that the decals nicely copy complex shapes and there is no clear film around. The matte varnish unifies the surface and works like a perfect base for oil shading. I am not sure with the shading, so I start carefully with a highly diluted dark yellow oil paint. I am trying to make the rivets slightly more pronounced and break uniform surface shade. Again, the oil paint dries slowly, so if you do not like the result, you can easily correct it or repair it with an enamel thinner. I am applying shading on the black with a combination of 3 shades, highlights with a grey, accumulated dust with a brown, and more shading with a dark blue. Now I have a better idea about shading, so I can apply darker tones. I'm also making similar shading on red strips, but this time with a dark red for shading and orange for highlights. Oh no, I have a foggy windows after unmasking. Hopefully I can easily clean them with a cotton swab. There is also more shading and weathering on the bottom side. The wheels didn't have fenders, and the tail didn't have wheels at all. After Great War, concrete airstrips were rare, so planes primarily landed on the grassy fields. So we can expect some splashes and dirt on this section. I am making matte splatters with enamel paint. It's interesting that the passengers and pilots were forced to walk on the wings to enter the interior. I can make some scratches there. Upon closely examining my photos, I realized that the lines were actually made from wooden slats, so they cannot be silver. I need to repaint them for local shows. at least you can avoid this mistake. However, the rest could be silver. I promised to create extra parts for every model, but this kit is perfect, so I made at least pre-war Suitcase and placed it into the interior. It is available for my Patreons or on Cult3D. I made dirty fuselage, thus I also need to make a dirty wheels. I use combination of enamel and oil paints. The wheels are small and thin, so it is handy to create subtle tire deflection. I am removing plastic with a micro grinder and smoothing it with a nail file. The cockpit trim was crafted from leather, matching the material of the seats. I choose a light brown color base and then improve the texture with an oil paint for richer finish. I recommend painting the black frame around the windshield while still in the plastic sprue. The fine detail is pull rods for the rudder. I made them from copper wire. Finally, I need to increase the weathering on the engine. I have also added extra leaks and dirt using acrylic paint to enhance the details. With this step, I am done. I never imagined I would create this type of aircraft, however, when I saw 3D renders of the new MiniArt kit, I simply couldn't resist. I was eager to discover how detailed the corrugated surface of the rivets would be, as well as how well the kit would fit together. Remarkably, I don't need any putty at all, which speaks volumes about the precision in this design and engineering. I made a few minor improvements to the engine cover, but they are quite insignificant. What I truly relished was the painting process, especially because the black and yellow marking is stunning. So, thank you for watching, to my Patreons for support, and see you next time!